She's freezing cold. Give her to me.
Here, we share meaningful moments and life lessons that inspire inner calm. Welcome to Stories of Satisfaction.
Richard Hartwell's hands trembled as he stared at the scene before him. His 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was curled up on the marble steps of their mansion, wrapped in a torn, dirty blanket. But she wasn't alone. A black boy, maybe 12 years old, wearing clothes too thin for the freezing December morning, had his arms wrapped around her, his own body shaking violently from the cold. Both of them had blue lips. Both were barely moving. "Lily!" Richard's scream cut through the dawn air as he ran toward them, his expensive shoes slipping on the frost-covered steps. The boy's eyes flickered open, dark brown eyes that held more courage than any child should have to hold. "She's okay," he whispered, his voice cracking from the cold. "I kept her warm. I kept her safe." Richard fell to his knees, pulling his daughter into his arms. She was ice cold, but breathing, alive. "Who are you?" Richard asked the boy, tears streaming down his face. "How long have you been out here?" "All night," the boy said simply, before his eyes rolled back and he collapsed. Can you imagine finding your child like this? Finding out a complete stranger, a homeless child, had saved her life while you were away? But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. 24 hours earlier, Marcus Williams sat on a bench outside the public library, watching the sun set over the wealthy neighborhood he'd walked to. At 12 years old, Marcus had been homeless for 2 years, ever since his mother died and he ran away from the first foster home they tried to put him in. He'd learned how to survive, which dumpsters behind which restaurants had the best food, which shelters asked the fewest questions, which streets were safe to sleep on and which ones weren't. But winter was different. Winter was dangerous. Marcus pulled his thin jacket tighter, even though it did almost nothing to keep out the December cold. He'd lost his sleeping bag 3 weeks ago when some older kids stole it. All he had now was a small blanket he'd found behind a thrift store, barely big enough to cover his shoulders. Tonight was supposed to be the coldest night of the year. 10 degrees, the news said, maybe lower. Marcus knew he needed to find shelter, real shelter, but the nearest homeless shelter was 5 miles away and he was so tired, so cold, so hungry. Just rest for a minute, Marcus told himself, even though he knew better. Just 5 minutes. Wait, I need to tell you something crucial about Marcus before we continue, because understanding who he was makes what he did next even more unbelievable. Marcus had every reason to be angry at the world. His mother died when he was 10, cancer that they couldn't afford to treat. He'd bounced through 3 foster homes in 6 months, each one worse than the last. The last family used the foster money for themselves and barely fed him, so Marcus ran. He decided being homeless and free was better than being trapped and miserable. But here's the thing about Marcus that made him different. He never lost his kindness. Even when the world was cruel to him, he stayed good. He shared food with other homeless people. He helped elderly folks carry their groceries. He returned lost wallets he found, even when he was starving. His mother had taught him that. Being poor doesn't mean being unkind, she used to say. We might not have money, but we have our hearts. Never lose that, Marcus. Never. And he hadn't. Even now, 2 years after losing her, he held on to those words like a lifeline. What would you do if you lost everything but had to choose whether to stay kind or become bitter? It's harder than you think. Marcus stood up from the bench, his legs stiff from sitting too long. He needed to start walking toward the shelter before it got any colder, before the snow that was predicted started to fall. But that's when he heard it. Crying. Soft, scared crying. Marcus stopped and listened. The sound was coming from behind a massive iron gate, the kind that protected the huge mansions in this neighborhood. Each house here was bigger than the entire apartment building Marcus used to live in with his mom. He walked closer to the gate, peering through the bars. That's when he saw her. A little girl in pink pajamas sat on the front steps of the biggest mansion Marcus had ever seen. She was hugging her knees, crying, her small body shaking. No coat, no shoes, just pajamas, in 10-degree weather. "Hey," Marcus called out softly. "Are you okay?" The girl's head snapped up. Her face was red from crying, her blonde hair messy. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. "I'm locked out," she said, her voice trembling. "The door won't open. I pressed the doorbell, but nobody comes. I'm so cold." Marcus looked at the massive mansion behind her. Lights were on inside. There had to be people in there. Staff, security, someone. "Have you tried knocking really loud?" Marcus asked. "I did. I knocked and knocked, but the house is so big and—" She started crying harder. And nobody hears me. Little did Marcus know, the decision he was about to make would change both their lives forever. Marcus looked up at the sky. Snow was starting to fall. In his 2 years on the streets, he'd learned to recognize dangerous weather. This was going to be bad. This little girl wouldn't survive the night out here in pajamas. He could walk away. He could go to the shelter and save himself. Nobody would blame him. He was just a kid himself, and he had nothing to give. But his mother's voice echoed in his head. We might not have money, but we have our hearts. Marcus made his decision. I'm coming over, he called to the girl. The gate was tall, maybe 10 feet, but Marcus had climbed fences before. He pulled himself up, his cold fingers barely able to grip the iron bars, and dropped down on the other side. The girl stared at him with wide blue eyes as he walked up the long driveway toward her. Who are you? She asked. My name's Marcus. What's yours? Lily. She wiped her nose with her pajama sleeve. Are you going to help me? I'm going to try. Marcus walked to the front door, a massive wooden thing that probably cost more than his mom's entire yearly salary used to be. He pounded on it with his fist, hard, over and over. No answer. He pressed the doorbell, held it down for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30. Still nothing. I told you, Lily said quietly. Nobody can hear. The house is too big and the staff bedrooms are in the back. Daddy's away on business. The new night guard doesn't start until morning. Marcus felt his heart sink. This wasn't just a mistake or an accident. This was dangerous. The temperature was dropping by the minute. Snow was falling faster now. Do you have a phone? Marcus asked. Can you call someone? Lily shook her head, crying again. My phone is inside. I just came out for 1 second to look at the stars because I couldn't sleep, and the door locked behind me. The automatic lock turned on, and I don't know the code. In exactly 8 hours, Lily's father would come home. But they didn't have 8 hours. At this temperature, Lily might not survive 3. Marcus looked at Lily shivering on the steps, then at his own thin jacket and small blanket. He had a choice to make. He could climb back over that fence, walk to the shelter and save himself, or he could stay. Okay, Marcus said, sitting down next to Lily on the cold marble step. We're going to get through this together. Together? Lily looked at him confused. But you don't even know me. Doesn't matter. You need help. I'm here. So we're going to help each other. Okay? Before Lily could answer, Marcus did something that still makes my heart ache when I think about it. He took off his jacket, his only jacket, and wrapped it around Lily's shoulders. Then he took his small blanket and wrapped it around both of them as best he could, pulling Lily close to share body heat. But Lily's voice was small. Now you'll be even colder. I'll be okay, Marcus lied. He was already so cold his teeth were chattering. I've been cold before. I know how to handle it. But you've never been this cold, have you? Lily shook her head. Then we need to keep you warm first. That's the rule. Actually, let me pause here because this detail is important. Marcus knew he was making a choice that could kill him. At 12 years old, he understood that giving away his only protection in this weather was dangerous. But he did it anyway. Why? Because that's who he was. That's who his mother raised him to be. Tell me about your mom, Lily said after a few minutes, her shivering slowing down slightly with the jacket and blanket around her. How did you know I was thinking about my mom? Marcus asked, surprised. You have this look on your face, like you're remembering someone. I get that look when I think about my mom too. She died when I was 5. Marcus looked at this little rich girl, this daughter of a billionaire, and realized they weren't so different after all. They'd both lost their mothers. They both knew what it felt like to have a hole in their hearts. My mom died 2 years ago, Marcus said quietly. Cancer. We couldn't afford the treatment that might have saved her. I'm sorry, Lily whispered. That's not fair. No, it's not. But she taught me something before she died. She taught me to stay kind even when the world isn't kind back. She said that's the only way to stay human. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, is that why you're helping me? Even though you're cold too? Yeah, that's why. They sat in silence for a while, huddled together as the snow fell harder around them. Marcus could feel his body starting to shut down from the cold. His fingers were numb. His toes felt like ice. His thoughts were getting fuzzy. But he kept talking to Lily, kept her awake, kept her hoping. What Marcus didn't know was that his body was going into the early stages of hypothermia, and he had maybe 2 hours before it became critical. Marcus? Lily's voice sounded scared. You're shaking really bad. I'm okay, Marcus said, but his words came out slurred. Not okay. Definitely not okay. No, you're not. Lily started crying again. This is my fault. If I hadn't gone outside, you wouldn't be here. You'd be somewhere warm. Hey, Marcus forced himself to focus, to push through the fog in his brain. This isn't your fault. You made a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes, but we're going to be okay. Your dad will come home. Someone will find us. When does your dad come home? Marcus asked, trying to keep his mind working, trying to stay conscious. He said early morning, around 6 a.m. He's been in California for meetings. Marcus looked at his wrist, but he didn't have a watch. He hadn't had one in 2 years. But from the darkness and the quiet, he guessed it was maybe 11 p.m. 7 hours. Could they make it 7 hours? He didn't know, but he had to try. Okay, Marcus said, his voice getting weaker. We're going to play a game. To keep our minds working, to stay awake. Because sleeping in this cold is dangerous, okay? Okay, Lily said, pressing closer to him. Tell me. Marcus's thoughts were getting fuzzy again. He shook his head, trying to clear it. Tell me about the best day you ever had. And so Lily talked. She told him about the day her dad took her to Disney World before her mom got sick. She told him about riding every roller coaster, eating cotton candy, watching fireworks. When she finished, Marcus told her about the day his mom took him to the beach, the only time they ever went, because they couldn't afford it usually. He told her about building sandcastles, finding shells, laughing in the waves. They traded stories, memories, dreams, anything to stay awake, anything to keep their minds working as the temperature dropped and dropped and dropped. By 2 a.m., Marcus was fading fast. His body had stopped shivering, which he knew was a very bad sign. Lily was doing better, protected by his jacket and blanket pressed against his body heat. But Marcus was dying. Marcus? Lily shook him gently. His eyes had closed. Marcus, wake up. You have to wake up. Tired, Marcus mumbled. So tired. No! You said we can't sleep. You said it's dangerous. Lily started crying hard now, shaking him harder. Please, Marcus. Please don't leave me alone. Please. The fear in her voice cut through the fog in Marcus's brain. He forced his eyes open. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I'm here. I'm awake. But he didn't know how much longer he could stay that way. Tell me more stories, Lily begged. Tell me anything. Just keep talking. So Marcus talked. About his mom. About the life they had before she got sick. About the apartment with the leaky ceiling and the neighbor who played guitar too loud and the corner store where the owner always gave him free candy. He talked about his dreams. About wanting to be a teacher someday. About wanting to help kids like him. Kids who had nothing but needed everything. And Lily talked too, about wanting to be a veterinarian, about her cat, Mr. Whiskers, about missing her mom, about feeling lonely in the big house even with all the staff around. They talked and talked and talked as the night crept toward dawn, and Marcus held on. Even as his body begged to shut down, even as the cold tried to take him, he held on, because a little girl needed him, and he'd promised. And Marcus Williams never broke his promises. Could you do what Marcus did? Could you give everything, literally everything, to save a stranger, even if it meant you might not survive? At 5:47 a.m., just as the first gray light of dawn started to appear, a black car pulled up to the mansion gate. Richard Hartwell was home early, eager to see his daughter after 3 days away. But when the gate opened and his headlights swept across the front steps, he saw something that stopped his heart. His daughter, wrapped in a dirty blanket and torn jacket, in the arms of a black boy who looked more dead than alive. Richard slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car, screaming Lily's name. That's when Marcus's eyes opened one last time. That's when he whispered, "She's okay. I kept her warm. I kept her safe." And then everything went black. Marcus woke up 3 hours later in a hospital bed. Every part of his body hurt. He was covered in warm blankets, connected to an IV, and a nurse was checking his temperature. "Welcome back," the nurse said with a kind smile. "You gave us quite a scare, young man." "Lily?" Marcus croaked. "Is she okay? The little girl? She's fine. Mild hypothermia. But she'll be perfectly okay. Thanks to you." The nurse's eyes got watery. "You saved her life, sweetheart. And almost died doing it." Before Marcus could respond, the door burst open. A tall man in an expensive suit stood there. Richard Hartwell, though Marcus didn't know that yet. Behind him stood 2 police officers, and Richard's face showed a mix of emotions Marcus couldn't quite read. Gratitude, suspicion, confusion. "We need to talk," Richard said, his voice tight. "About what you were doing with my daughter." What happened next would determine whether Marcus was treated as a hero or as a suspect. Marcus sat up in the hospital bed, his body aching from the hypothermia, but his mind sharp with fear. He'd seen that look before. in store owners who followed him around, in police officers who stopped him for walking suspiciously, in people who saw a black homeless boy and assumed the worst. "I didn't do anything wrong," Marcus said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I was just trying to help." One of the police officers, a woman with kind eyes named Detective Patricia Moore, stepped forward. "Nobody's accusing you of anything, son. We just need to understand what happened." "What happened?" Richard interrupted, his voice shaking with emotion Marcus couldn't quite read. "Is that my daughter was locked outside in 10-degree weather all night, and nobody inside my house noticed. And this boy—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "This boy saved her life." Marcus blinked, surprised. That wasn't what he expected to hear. "Mr. Hartwell has been watching the security footage," Detective Moore explained gently. "We all have. And son, what you did was extraordinary. Wait, let me tell you what was on that security footage, because it's important. The cameras had captured everything. Lily coming outside in her pajamas at 10:47 p.m. to look at the stars. The door clicking locked behind her. Her trying the handle, pressing the doorbell, knocking. Her sitting down on the steps, crying. Then, at 11:23 p.m., Marcus appearing at the gate. The conversation through the bars. His decision to climb over. His attempts to get inside the house. And then, the part that made everyone who watched it cry. Marcus taking off his jacket and wrapping it around Lily. Marcus covering them both with his small, threadbare blanket. Marcus holding this little girl he'd never met. Keeping her warm with his own body heat, even as he started to freeze. The footage showed hours of Marcus talking to Lily, keeping her awake, telling her stories, singing songs when he could barely form words. It showed him forcing himself to stay conscious even as his body shut down. It showed a 12-year-old homeless boy choosing to die, if necessary, to save a stranger's child. Can you imagine watching footage of someone saving your child's life while risking their own? What would you feel? Richard Hartwell walked closer to Marcus's bed, and now Marcus could see his face clearly. The man wasn't angry. He was crying. "I owe you an apology," Richard said, his voice breaking. "When I first saw you with my daughter, I thought terrible things. I'm ashamed to admit it. But I saw a homeless black boy, and He couldn't finish. "You thought I hurt her," Marcus finished quietly. "People always think that about me. I was wrong. So completely, terribly wrong." Richard sat down in the chair next to the bed. "The security footage shows everything. It shows a boy with more courage and kindness than most adults I know. It shows you giving everything you had to save my daughter. He had to stop, overwhelmed with emotion. "Is Lily really okay?" Marcus asked. That was all that mattered to him. "She's in the next room. Mild hypothermia, like the nurse said. She'll be released this afternoon." Richard wiped his eyes. "She won't stop talking about you. She keeps saying, 'Marcus saved me, Daddy. He's my guardian angel.'" Little did Marcus know, Richard Hartwell was about to make him an offer that would change everything. But first, there was a problem they all needed to address. Detective Moore cleared her throat. "Marcus, we need to ask you some questions. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you're a minor living on the streets. We need to understand your situation." Marcus's stomach dropped. He knew what this meant. Social services, foster care, being trapped again. "I'm fine on my own," Marcus said quickly. "I know how to take care of myself. I don't need—" "You almost died last night," Richard interrupted gently. "You were minutes away from severe hypothermia. Another hour, and—" He couldn't say it out loud. "But I didn't die, and I'm okay now. So I can just go—" "Where?" Detective Moore asked, her voice kind but firm. "Marcus, it's December. It's going to be below freezing for the next 2 weeks. Where will you go? What will you do?" Marcus looked down at his hands. He didn't have an answer. He'd been asking himself those same questions for days. "He has a home," Richard said suddenly. "If he wants it." Everyone turned to stare at Richard. "What?" Detective Moore asked. Richard stood up, his voice growing stronger. "Marcus saved my daughter's life. He gave everything he had, literally everything, to protect a child he'd never met. He's 12 years old, and he's been living on the streets for 2 years. Well, not anymore. Not if I have anything to say about it." "Mr. Hartwell," the detective said carefully, "I understand you're grateful, but you can't just—" "I can, and I will." Richard turned to Marcus. "I want you to come live with us, with Lily and me. I want to give you a home, a family, everything you deserve. I want to adopt you, if you'll let me." Marcus stared at Richard like he'd started speaking another language. Adopt him? Live in that massive mansion? Be part of a family again? I don't understand, Marcus whispered. You don't even know me. I know enough, Richard said firmly. I know you're brave. I know you're kind. I know you're exactly the kind of person I want my daughter to grow up around. I know my daughter is alive because of you, and I can never repay that, but I want to try. Actually, let me pause here because what happened next reveals something important about Richard Hartwell. Richard had built his tech empire from nothing. He'd grown up poor himself, though not as poor as Marcus. He'd fought and scraped his way to billions. But in the process, he'd lost something, his connection to real people, to real problems. When his wife died of cancer 3 years ago, he'd thrown himself into work, leaving Lily with nannies and staff. He'd given her everything money could buy, but forgotten to give her what she needed most, him. Seeing Marcus, seeing this boy with nothing give everything to save his daughter, had cracked something open in Richard's heart. It reminded him of who he used to be, who he wanted to be again. But there was a problem, a big one. Mr. Hartwell, Detective Moore said carefully, I admire what you're trying to do, but it's not that simple. Marcus is a ward of the state. He ran away from foster care. There are procedures, protocols. I'll handle it, Richard said. I have lawyers, good ones. We'll do this the right way, but we'll do it fast. There's something else, the detective continued. Marcus, your last foster family filed a missing person report when you ran away 2 years ago. They've been looking for you. Marcus felt his blood run cold. The Hendersons. The family who took foster kids for the money and treated them like servants. The family he'd run away from in the middle of the night because he couldn't take it anymore. No, Marcus said, his voice panicked. I'm not going back there. I won't. I'll run again. You won't have to, Richard said firmly. I promise you, Marcus, you won't go back there. We'll fight this, together. Mr. Hartwell means well, Detective Moore said, but the Hendersons still have legal custody, unless they agree to give it up, or unless we can prove neglect or abuse. Then we prove it, Richard said. Marcus, tell us what happened there. Tell us why you ran. In exactly 3 days, there would be a custody hearing that would determine Marcus's future. But first, they needed to hear his story. Marcus took a deep breath. He'd never told anyone this. Not the police who occasionally questioned him on the streets, not the social workers who'd placed him there, not anyone. But looking at Richard's determined face and Detective Moore's kind eyes, he decided to trust them. The Hendersons took in 5 foster kids, Marcus began, his voice quiet. They got paid for each of us, but they spent the money on themselves. We got 1 meal a day, usually just rice or pasta, nothing else. We slept on mattresses on the floor, 3 kids to a mattress. Richard's face grew darker with each word. They made us do all the housework, cooking, cleaning, yard work. If we didn't do it right, they'd... Marcus stopped, the memories flooding back. Mr. Henderson had a belt. He used it a lot. Detective Moore was taking notes, her face tight with anger. I lasted 6 months, Marcus continued. Then one night, Mr. Henderson hit me so hard I couldn't stand up. That's when I knew. I'd rather be homeless and free than stay there one more day. So I waited until everyone was asleep and I ran. I've been running ever since. The room was silent except for the beeping of the heart monitor. Did you ever try to report them? Detective Moore asked gently. Who would believe me? A foster kid with no family, no proof, no nothing, against a family that looks perfect on paper? Marcus shook his head. I just wanted to survive. That's all. Richard stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. They're not getting you back. I don't care what it takes. You're not going back to people who hurt you. But what Richard didn't know was that the Hendersons had powerful friends, and they weren't going to give up their foster money without a fight. 2 hours later, Lily burst into Marcus's room, her father trying to keep up behind her. She was still in a hospital gown, with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, but her face was bright with joy. Marcus! She ran to his bed and threw her arms around him, careful not to disturb his IV. You're awake! You're okay! Hey, Lily. Marcus smiled, a real smile, the first one in a long time. How are you feeling? I'm good. The doctor said I was really lucky. He said if you hadn't kept me warm, I would have... She couldn't finish, tears filling her eyes. You saved my life. You would have done the same for me, Marcus said simply. I want you to come live with us, Lily said, pulling back to look at him seriously. Daddy says he's going to adopt you. That means you'll be my brother. We can play together and have adventures and... She stopped, suddenly uncertain. Do you want to? Do you want to be my brother? Marcus looked at this little girl who he'd met just hours ago. This girl who had cried with him, shared stories with him, survived the longest night with him. Yeah, Marcus said, his throat tight with emotion. I'd like that a lot. Lily hugged him again, and Richard stood in the doorway, watching with tears streaming down his face. Wait, because what happened over the next 3 days would test everyone's resolve. The Hendersons didn't go quietly. They hired a lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who argued that Marcus was a troubled child who ran away because he didn't want to follow rules. They claimed they'd been searching for him out of concern. They produced fake records showing they'd given him everything he needed. Richard hired 3 lawyers, the best in the state. They investigated the Hendersons, interviewed the other foster children who'd been in that house, gathered evidence of neglect and abuse. Detective Moore opened an official investigation into the Henderson foster home, and on the 3rd day, they all gathered in family court. Marcus sat between Richard and one of his lawyers, wearing new clothes that Richard had bought him. Clean, warm, comfortable. He barely recognized himself. Across the courtroom, the Hendersons sat with their lawyer, wearing fake, concerned expressions that made Marcus's stomach turn. The judge, a woman named Judge Anderson, looked over all the paperwork, all the evidence, all the testimony. Then she asked Marcus to approach the bench. Marcus, Judge Anderson said kindly, I've read your story. I've seen the evidence, but I need to hear from you, in your own words. What do you want? Marcus took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. I want a family, Marcus said, his voice shaking but clear. I want to stop running. I want to stop being scared all the time. He looked back at Richard and Lily, who sat in the front row holding hands. I want to be with people who see me, really see me, not as a paycheck or a problem or someone to use, but as a person. And do you believe Mr. Hartwell and his daughter see you that way? The judge asked. Yes, ma'am, I do. Because when I had nothing, when I was cold and homeless and invisible to everyone else, Lily needed me, and she didn't see a homeless kid. She saw someone who cared, someone who stayed. Marcus's voice grew stronger, and Mr. Hartwell looked at me, really looked at me, and saw past what everyone else sees. He saw who I actually am. Judge Anderson nodded slowly. And the Hendersons? Do they see you that way? Marcus looked at his former foster parents, their fake concern, their calculated expressions. No, ma'am, they never did. The judge looked at her papers one more time. Then she looked at the Hendersons' lawyer. Based on the evidence of neglect, the testimony from other foster children, and the ongoing investigation by social services, I'm removing Marcus Williams from the Hendersons' custody immediately. The Hendersons' lawyer jumped up to protest, but the judge held up her hand. Furthermore, she continued, I'm granting temporary custody to Richard Hartwell pending completion of the adoption process. This court finds that Mr. Hartwell has demonstrated both the means and the genuine desire to provide Marcus with a loving, stable home. Marcus felt his knees go weak. Did she just say? Richard was beside him in an instant, his hand on Marcus's shoulder. You're coming home, he whispered. You're really coming home. And Marcus, who hadn't cried in 2 years, who'd taught himself to stay strong no matter what, broke down sobbing in the middle of the courtroom. 6 months later, on a warm June afternoon, Marcus and Lily sat in the backyard of the Hartwell mansion, which now felt like home, not a museum, building a blanket fort under the big oak tree. Make sure that corner is secure, Marcus instructed, handing Lily a clothespin. We don't want it to fall down. Like this? Lily asked, clipping the blanket to a low branch. Perfect. They crawled inside their fort, where Marcus had set up pillows, snacks, and Lily's favorite stuffed animals. Through the blanket walls, they could see Richard walking across the lawn toward them, carrying lemonade and cookies. Room for one more? Richard called out. Always, Marcus and Lily said together, then laughed. Richard squeezed into the fort, somehow managing not to knock it down. They sat together, this unlikely family, built not from blood but from one cold night and the choice to stay, to help, to love. Marcus, Lily said, taking a cookie, do you remember that night, when you found me? Every single second, Marcus said honestly. I was so scared, I thought I was going to... She stopped, then continued. But then you came, and you stayed, even though you didn't have to, even though it hurt you. I would do it again, Marcus said simply. 1,000 times. Richard's eyes filled with tears, happy tears this time. You know what the miracle is? He said. That night I thought I lost everything. I thought I was going to lose Lily. But instead, I gained everything. I got my daughter back. I got a son I didn't know I needed. I got a second chance to be the father I should have been all along. He pulled both children close. You saved more than Lily that night, Marcus. You saved all of us. Do you believe in miracles? Not the magic kind, but the human kind, where one person's courage changes everything for everyone around them. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky orange and pink, Marcus stood at his bedroom window, his bedroom, in his home, with his family downstairs, and thought about his mother. He pulled out the one photo he had of her, crumpled and faded from 2 years in his pocket. She was smiling in the picture, her arm around a younger Marcus, both of them laughing at something the camera couldn't capture. I kept your promise, Mom, Marcus whispered. I stayed kind, even when it was hard, even when the world wasn't kind back. And look what happened. Look what being kind brought me. He could almost hear her voice. I'm proud of you, baby. So proud. A knock on his door made him turn. Lily peeked her head in. Dad's making hot chocolate. Want some? Yeah, Marcus said, carefully putting his mother's photo on his nightstand, right next to a new photo of him, Lily, and Richard at Marcus's official adoption ceremony. I'll be right down. Lily started to leave, then turned back. Marcus, I'm glad you found me that night. I'm glad you stayed. Me too, Lily. Me too. As Marcus followed his sister downstairs, toward the sound of Richard singing off-key in the kitchen, toward the smell of hot chocolate and the promise of family game night, he realized something important. He'd spent 2 years being invisible, being no one, being nothing. But he'd never actually been nothing. He'd always been someone. He'd always mattered. It just took one cold night, one terrified little girl, and one impossible choice to prove it. Not just to the world, but to himself. The story ends with Marcus's voice, older now, telling this tale to a room full of students years later. He's a teacher now. The dream he had that cold night finally come true. People ask me all the time, Marcus says, why I gave everything I had to save a stranger. And my answer is simple, because that's what we're supposed to do. That's what makes us human. Not our money or our status or our power, but our choice, in that critical moment, to stay or to walk away, to give or to take, to love or to fear. He looks at the diverse group of students, some rich, some poor, all listening with wide eyes. Lily wasn't a stranger for long. She became my sister. Richard became my father. That mansion became my home. But none of that would have happened if I'd walked away, if I'd chosen to save only myself. Marcus smiles. So, when you face your moment, and you will face it, everyone does, ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be? The kind who walks away, or the kind who stays? The bell rings. Students gather their things. But one boy stays behind, thin, wearing clothes too small, eyes that have seen too much. Mr. Williams, the boy says quietly, I'm in foster care. They're not good people. I don't know what to do. Marcus kneels down to the boy's level, just like he used to with Lily all those years ago. You come talk to me, Marcus says gently. Tomorrow, after school, we'll figure it out together. Nobody has to be alone. Nobody has to be invisible. Not anymore. The boy's eyes fill with tears of relief, and Marcus thinks about that cold December night 16 years ago, about the choice he made, about the family he found, about how sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. If you enjoy this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more.